Okay, welcome back to the second half of Module 1. I'm going to share my screen so you can see and turn to your workbook, page 9. This image not only maps the developmental stages a child goes through, but it breaks up the developmental needs into the part of the brain where it first arises. So Emily, why don't you tell us a little bit about the image here?
Okay, so we're we're looking at page 9 and talking through each stage. So when babies are born, they're born with their brain stem, and then the other three areas of the brain, midbrain. I'm sorry, well, I guess we're including the brain stem as number 1, and then number 2 is the midbrain, and number 3 is the prefrontal cortex. And so in the first 7 years of life, there's rapid development with all three, and all three areas of the brain work together. But when babies are first born, they just have this part of their brain. So there's no other time in our lives where there's as much rapid development as there is in the first 7 years. So the midbrain is also the limbic system, which I'm going to go over here, but that's the midbrain. All of your hormones, emotions are stored in there. This is developing between the ages of 2.5 or 3 through 5 to 7 years old. And then the higher brain function, we're going to start seeing that coming on around age 5, and really working to age 7 and then beyond through into the mid 20s, because none of these things are fixed. So it's not like you have your 7th birthday and you're just done developing. It's around these ages. But we do see in the midbrain, this limbic time frame, a lot of increased behavioral challenges. And so culturally, we've talked about that quite a bit. People say things like terrible twos and things like that, because we're seeing this huge change during that time inside of emotionality as well. So you see, and there's a lot of impulsivity that's just normal during this time. We see 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds have increased what looks like aggressive behavior, but I'm going to say that that's adult. It's an adult lens on very normal, typical developing behavior, because children at this age, very self-centered, very emotional. Everything is right now. If transitions can be very challenging because they live in the moment. So yeah, we're done playing, it's time to get ready for bed. That transition can bring up a huge upheaval for young children, because is it going to last forever? If they have to go to bed, that means there's a break from play, from their families. It's dark, then they can't articulate all of that stuff. They also can't plan because they haven't experienced the higher brain function yet. So the brain is very malleable, changing rapidly, and has very distinct times and behaviors associated with how that brain is developing in the first 7 years. So science teaches us that fear, or any kind of fear tactics or fear in the environment, activates the limbic system, which then is going to bring us down to our low brain, where fight, flight, freeze lives. So young children can't access higher brain function, or the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for empathy and problem solving, planning, critical thinking skills. And that's because higher brain function takes place later. So between, around the ages of 5, it's coming online and really working around until age 7, and then continues to develop into the mid 20s. So brains are rapidly developing, disorganized, inconsistent. They lack impulse control. Children under 7 years old generally have newer and inefficient connections to that part of the brain, higher brain function, that rules sequential thought. So they can't predict consequences or realize that there's another moment besides right now. And so limited brain structure means they can't always remember or understand that things are going to change. You see this with young children where you say, what did you do last weekend? Let's say it's Monday at school. What did you do? And they'll say, my grandma came to my house and that happened 2 weeks ago. right? Maybe you've been talking about something that's coming up next, in over winter break, we're going to do XYZ and it's a couple months away. They'll then say, tomorrow we're going to go, have a break or go on holiday or go play in the snow. And that shows you they can't really hold it. They know some piece of it, that it's coming next, or they know it happened before, but they don't have that planning ability yet. So they also cannot predict consequences or realize that there's another moment besides now. So when parents or teachers, people say, if you do that again, you're going to go in timeout, for instance, right? So that would be a fear tactic that is very socially acceptable, to get the kid to realize they need to stop what they're doing or this behavior. And if they don't, then they're going to, have this thing happen to them. There's this punishment, as a way to get them to learn. So many kids, even if they comply with that order, they're complying out of fear. They may not know exactly what's going to happen, but they know that it's scary. Some kids are going to rebel against that stress in their bodies, because it doesn't map to what's actually happening. Right.
Mhm.
And so it's very confusing for young children, because of this brain development phase, and the 95% of the brain is developing in the first 7 years of life. And that's rapid. That's so intense. That means that their little brains are working so hard every day and trying to filter out and make sense of all of their experiences. So
you can see why it creates a lot of frustration too, because you see that so much
for everybody, right? Because parents that utilize some of those fear-based strategies are, usually doing the best they can, doing what they learned, doing what society says is okay, and kids are also doing the best they can with limited understanding, of how these things work, and trying all the time to make sense of what's going on. So, that's what we're doing here, right? Getting out our magnifying glasses and trying to illuminate the path forward in a more sustainable way. So interestingly enough, as adults, our brains are developed. If you're over 25, past your mid-20s, then you have a fully developed brain. But here's where it gets interesting. When we get triggered, adults get triggered. We get frustrated, we get overwhelmed, any kind of stress response. Our brains, that happens in the amygdala, the midbrain, we're going to get pulled down into our brainstem, which is where fight, flight, freeze is. And so we too will behave in a similar manner that has been socially conditioned, right? So you grew up in a family of yellers, you're probably gonna be a yeller, right? If you grew up in a family where people ignored you, you're gonna have functioned for a period of time inside of fight, flight, freeze, based on who you are, your personality, who you come with, your spirit, your soul, and your environment is going to make it so that you're going to jump to fight, flight, freeze. If we want to move out of fight, flight, freeze, we're going to be talking about maturity. So growing out of those automatic responses is simply a learned skill. So we can all learn how to do this. But so when we're triggered, our bodies are flooded with hormones, just like those little kids, just like 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds. And we have trouble problem solving when we're triggered because our bodies are overwhelmed, our nervous systems are activated. Some of us have kind of tunnel vision, or we feel like you're floating, or you might get panicky. You know what it's like to be triggered. And we can only see or feel right now. Or maybe not even, right? Some of us disassociate. We're not even in our bodies in these moments of overwhelm and flood. So it's uncomfortable, it's unbearable for adults and children alike. And we as adults, we're going to look for an escape, so to speak. And a lot of this is happening unconsciously. A lot of us don't even realize what's happening. But the ways that we see escape, it's a form of a maladaptive strategy, is the science terminology here. we see yelling, we see exploding, we see avoiding behaviors, ignoring, fixing, manipulating, bypassing, people pleasing or fawning, masking. You feel really uncomfortable on the inside, but you're smiling and everything's just fine. Everything's going great. A lot of these are conditioned, culturally acceptable ways of navigating stress. Overreacting, also dismissing. So Christiana and I were actually speaking privately about generational differences as well. And so you'll see some of these in very specific behaviors in certain generations more often, right? So dismissing, ignoring, fixing, people pleasing, yelling, things like that, you're going to see specifically in older generations, so boomers, people over the age of 60, I think it's mid 60s and beyond. At this point, we also see more serious maladaptive behaviors like substance abuse, addictions, and physical abuse. So we're including these all as maladaptive strategies or stress responses that need a little help. And we want to normalize these things because these are behaviors that everybody's got one of those going on, as their primary reactor inside of this. So toxic stress, or, when we function inside of that level of stress, it affects our brain's ability to assess danger and act in ways that reduce stress in the future. So this speaks to, the body keeps score, or the conversations from Vanderkolk. And what we know now is that, if you were in a toxic or stressful environment at 3 or 4 or 5 years old, you may not remember exactly what happened, but your body does. And so when we get triggered in the present, our bodies go back to that memory stored in the body and we react. And so much of this is unconscious until we begin to wake up or peel the layers back and kind of take a look, investigate what's going on under the surface.
Oh, may I call a pause?
Yeah.
I know you like to call it pineapple with your families. It is perfect because we just came off of the break that was a somatic based exercise. But we really want to build this body mind connection with our listeners. And me coming as a cranial sacral therapist or a somatic therapist, it's really a skill that helps parents navigate what's going on in their bodies so that they can deal with themselves first and stop this cascade of emotions that's happening in these whirlwinds that you were speaking about, Emily. Like when you get angry or you shut down, and I mean, there's just so much going on. So I just want to take a moment to breathe. And when I breathe, I love to just notice my feet on the floor. And maybe even where I'm holding some tension in my body. And this is exactly the exercise that we have in our book here that we included in the break for you to watch is on page 10. It's just learning a little bit more about what's happening into your body when you are stressed. Because those signs are signals that you can learn. The more mind-body connection that you build, and there's signposts like, oh, I know what's happening. And it's a signpost that you can turn one direction, pause yourself, take a deep breath, do whatever it needs, to self-care. Maybe you can walk away from the situation for a moment, whatever it may be, because your body creates an energetic field. And all these things that you're talking about in the brain that we saw on the previous page these emotions, they actually create, the brain creates neuropeptides. Now, Candace Pert wrote this book that you're going to hear us mention throughout this class, but The Molecules of Emotion. And they actually have an energy quality to them because they're biological, they're chemical, and they're electromagnetic. And they literally evaporate through the pores in your skin. So you can feel when you walk by somebody who's really pissed off, you can tell there's like an energy about them. We call
Absolutely.
it like a contraction in the field, like a restriction. You can tell how shut down they are. They're not in that like cool, calm, collective,
Right.
kumbaya stage.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I was just thinking of heart math too, and the
yes,
coherence conversation, and how we know now too that the heart has its own nervous system, and that
yes,
it can be measured heart energy can be measured 3 feet off of the body. And so when I
yeah.
interpret that, and I'm talking to my clients, I'm talking about, our close relationships with our partners or our children, and how they can feel. We actually sync up. Our nervous systems sync up with our close people, our loved ones, and
Yeah.
and that's why we see young children, they look kind of psychic, they can channel their parents. And I'm going to say, let's talk about that. Let's talk about heart energy and how
Yeah.
they are feeling what their parents are feeling. They can't make sense of it. They can't articulate it completely, but they may show their own version of stress behavior because they can feel that you're having stress behavior. So it
Yeah.
helps with co-regulation as well. If you're practicing co-regulation and centeredness and connection, and you're in the presence of your child, they're going to feel it too.
Oh, it's like I'm glad that you brought this up, with heart consciousness and heart math, all this.
Yeah.
Children are channeling this in the womb.
Yeah.
From the very get-go, like every emotion predominantly in the biological mother's body is what gets imprinted upon their psyche, upon their biology, like everything. And so they know their mother intimately, all of the emotions, and including the father, because the father is influencing, if there is a father or a partner,
Right.
they're influencing the field, the energetic field, in that relational space between the mother,
Right.
right? So this practicing comes on board at the very get-go, and
Right.
it doesn't stop. And like, this is why we'll show that children's brain waves are even at a different state than adults. They're at slower brain waves. They're more in like meditative and conscious
Yeah.
super sentient states.
Yeah.
That's how they're just soaking everything up into their being.
Yeah.
And they are mirroring, there's mirror neurons in the brain, like
That's right.
what they see, like monkey see, monkey do. It's like where these sayings come from, but or what do they say? In the ear, out the mouth. But it's so important, this emotional backpack. And I know you're going to speak about that now, Emily, and I'll turn the page because we talked about having a pineapple moment,
Yeah.
and teaching these moments of regulation in your family is great.
It's
It's
super
a
important.
tool, whatever tool you come up with, because and it's, you can even acknowledge and name your own feelings, which is what this class is about. We're going to get to that point, but naming, I'm angry right now. Mom needs a pineapple. I'm stepping away now. Now that can even be triggering for a child based on their birth history and other things that happen.
Yeah.
But if you're in a regulated space and you teach your children like in a calm setting, like emotions, and saying like mommy's mad, they're going to learn those things about you and not take it on as like mommy's mad at me.
Right.
So I
Right.
think that's interesting, this whole break. But I know when we switch, because we're getting close to the end of our module, and I'll stop sharing because you're going to cover a little bit, Emily, about how children and adults learn from experience and how this body-mind connection is like an emotional backpack. We carry all this stuff around.
Yeah. Yeah. So children and adults learn from experiences, and all that we experience are stored in our body like an emotional backpack. And the brain is pattern seeking. So our minds are constantly assessing the amygdala, each and every experience in our emotional backpack, so to speak, looking for evidence to confirm and provide meaning to our story. So, let's say we have a stressful experience, we're gonna promise in life, we do. Every time we experience some stress, which is going to be personal to you, it's right, subjective. Your brain scans, the amygdala scans. Am I safe? Is this safe? What's happening? Have I been here before? How does this work? And then it's going to inform, and this happens really fast and behind the scenes. We don't even realize this is happening. But we're looking for confirmation. Oh, I'm good. This is exciting. This is fun. I want to do this. Or, ooh, this doesn't feel good. My body feels safe. I want to run. Or, I don't know what to do. I'm in a panic. I'm frozen. Your brain assesses every time. So children and adults alike, we've got way more stuff in our backpack as adults than children do, of course. But this backpack concept comes from Eckhart Tolle, and I just kind of adopted it for this because it makes so much sense. He was kind of the beginning conversation. You were having these conversations. Now we've got science that actually proves it. But, in a variety of areas, folks have been having this conversation, right? So this inner child conversation, or things that happen in the past affect you today. We now know that is real, that is true. So unprocessed or poorly processed experiences become negative stories, so to speak, or memories, implicit or explicit, lurking under the surface, waiting to be triggered by our body's attempt to heal or make sense of experiences. So as a longtime teacher, classroom teacher of young children, I'll say that's what kids are doing all the time, every day, is attempting to make sense of experiences, the environment. If it doesn't hold meaning to them, it's useless. They don't, they need to make sense of it. They're so curious and inquisitive. They want to put their hands in all the things. They want to roll around in the mud. They want to touch and experience. I mean, that's why I love them so much. So what a delight. And like you were saying too, with their, beta waves and all their ability to be so meditative and present in the right environment. Because some people are probably listening to this thinking, my 3-year-old is not meditative. But
and that's not what we mean.
Yeah.
We mean that their actual brain wave
yes
is in that frequency or hertz level that we take on when we get into deep sleep and when we are meditative. But
that's
they're
right. And
function at that all the time.
And I'll back that up by saying, in the 10 years of research and data I have at running a school where these things were the backbone, right? The backbone of the program. And I created this space, this very creative space where there was a million different things for kids to engage with, right? That I would see flow states with children every day in the classroom, which was remarkable because adults work to even attempt to get close to a full flow state because we have so much going on in busy lives and work and jobs and relationships and all the things we have to manage. That's why people meditate, in the evening, or work out or go to therapy or do cranial sacral or whatever they do to be able to be centered or create balance in their lives. But young children are there if we can create this environment. It truly, young children.
It's so funny too. Babies are showing us all the time. In fact, I've even seen, literature where it's 90% of what a baby's motions are in its bodies, its hand gestures, where it touches itself, are all motions of expressing the inner psyche.
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
memories, what you're talking about, memories that they had from
They're bringing,
prenatal life.
yeah,
Yep. Even through birth and whatever length of time they've been in the, physical outside world, right, of the womb. And this carries on into how they play as a toddler, the way, what they play with, how they play, all is a reflection of their memories, their implicit memories, what you're, and the emotional field that have been attached with these memories.
yeah.
So it's really, once you realize that, that can be kind of a scary thing. Like, oh my gosh, like,
Really intense. Yeah. I mean, but that's why, I'll just repeat what I said before, unprocessed or poorly processed or, things that lack meaning, experiences that lack meaning or don't, need a way out or movement, flexibility, become negative stories or feelings, or it becomes some heavy, it's a burden
yeah,
lurking under the surface in an attempt for the body's attempt to make sense of it, which is why these grow into triggers over time, right? So we get frustrated with the guy that cuts us off in traffic and we're honking our horn and flipping the middle finger and having this big upset. Yeah, that's frustrating to most people to get cut off, right? It's or
yeah,
going to evoke some stress response in everyone. But the way that how each of us handle those situations illuminates where we're coming from, what we're bringing to the situation, and what the story is
yeah,
there. So learning how to interpret and decipher the behavior, the reaction as communication or the gateway to illuminating from the past is also the gateway to connection in relationship between caregiver and child. So when
oh,
we
it's so
say,
well
yeah,
said. It's so well said, because I mean, that's what the whole class is about, how the past hijacks the present. And
yeah,
because what all you're carrying, if you haven't sorted through this
yeah,
emotional backpack, you've got an emotional volcano.
yeah, for sure. Or an emotional cliff or it's
Yes.
flatlined, I mean, and doing this work in tandem with children too, right? We don't have to
Mhm.
have this all done before we have children. I found for me, it was working with young children helped me be able to do this work for
Yeah.
myself. So doing it in tandem was really helpful to me. We don't have to arrive first, but we want to look at ourselves inside of relationships so we can help kids make sense of their experiences, their scary, sad, hard things that happen during the day and in life, and for ourselves as well. And it's an ongoing practice, and that level of intimacy is what we're striving for in terms of the point here is that if we can create connection like that with our people, with our families, with our partners, then we've created the safety needed and we're really living up to our biology or even our, any kind of belief system that
Mm-hmm.
people hold around this stuff, spirituality inside of it, where we're biologically designed to be in connection. And this path helps us cultivate that connection.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a different way of seeing it and very informed at this point since we have so much neuroscience to back up some of these things that are in line with some spiritual belief systems already, which is so
And
foundational piece of this paradigm shift is understanding that all behavior is communication. So adults can help children to identify and name their feelings and uncover these stories that are under the surface and help them make sense of what happened to create meaning around the situation and figure out the unconscious stories that we're telling to so we can process and map the fight, flight, freeze and help with regulation and maturity inside of that. So we're going from the brainstem up. If we want to help, we're working in tandem with the brain. If we're doing this with children that are 3, 4, 5 years old and above, then we're literally aiding in the development of the brain. We're helping lay pathways. So once we gain regulation too inside of difficult moments in life, that's really what we need. We cannot bubble wrap life. Life is going to throw difficulties our way periodically. We're going to have stress. We're going to have hard times. Things are going to come up. A lot of us want to avoid that. We want to do everything we can to bubble wrap our children's experiences. And so surrendering to life is going to happen. But when things fall apart, I have these tools. I have these robust tools inside of regulation to help myself and to help my kid. So we've gone over a lot of information in module 1. It's really good stuff. Take your time, because this is the blueprint of the class. This is the blueprint of where we're going to go next, is to understand the roots here, the baseline. And then we're quickly faced with pressure to do better when we start to kind of understand these things, right? But we can't do better until we know better, right? So children need loads of attention, more than people want to admit, attunement and curiosity and compassion. Not only, they also need to have real life experiences, and it's okay for you to be human too, but we want to be intentional with these interactions. And put into practice these skills that we're talking about. And you might say, okay, sounds great, sign me up, I want to do it. And there's a pause, which is why Christiana, interrupted a little while ago too, with a pineapple pause, just to take, it's a balance, it's a dance, it's a flexibility. We're going to take some information in, we're going to take a pause, we're going to get back to it as long as you need. You can decide how much time is in between those things, because for integration, we have to consider, get some new information, practice, take a break, try again, practice, not do well, try again, listen again. You got to figure out your waltz inside of this stuff. So often emotions have been overlooked culturally. We haven't known what to do with them. So we've been dismissed, right? Or we have been met with anger or what have you. So this is such new groundbreaking approach and skills. This is a big deal, and it's not instant. We can't just watch these episodes and get it. We really have to feel our way through it. So please take your time. Most of us struggle with our own emotions. Our culture hasn't acknowledged or honored authentic experience. This is a big deal. This is very paradigm shifting, new approach. So negative feelings are very uncomfortable. A lot of times when I'm working with clients, they'll say things like, well, I didn't want to bring it back up again because I want to relive the trauma, which is valid. I understand completely. And it's also at times really helpful to be able to go back and make sense of hard things that have happened. Not everyone wants to do that, and that's okay too, but we can also work with identifying the core feelings so that we can move forward with more coherence or understanding. So we're misinformed if we think that listening to children is rewarding misbehavior. It's also, many of us are struggling with boundaries. We're struggling within attachment. We're struggling within relationships. We're too passive or too controlling or both. Many of us are uncomfortable witnessing children's big emotions. We instantly feel guilty or powerless. And then we've got all those strategies, maladaptive strategies that come up. So we want to do the work of engaging in rereading our emotional backpacks in order to support children to do the same. And we're called to honor the perspective of children. And I think that's really difficult for folks sometimes. If your child who you love and working so hard to support says, I hate you, you're the worst, it hurts, and we end up taking it personally. Kids are going to use whatever strategies they have to give you the information that they're struggling, and they don't have the maturity to say, hey, hold up, can we take some space here? I'm feeling really reactive and I need to, take some time alone to regulate my nervous system. Like, we would love it if our partner spoke that way, right? That's a very mature way of speaking. So of course, young children are not going to speak that way, right? They need our help inside of that. So we want to offer connection over and over, knowing that it is enough and it's what's needed for children to gain the skills we desire for them. And so, yeah, starting starting slowly with our attachment, with our experience that we can remember growing up. If you can't remember your childhood, you want to kind of identify who you are today, and we can help kind of make the path towards linking the past there too.
That brings us right up to the end of where we wanted to take everybody on this journey through module 1, and why we're going to ask you on page 12 of the workbook, the questions that we're going to ask you. So we want you to reflect on these through journaling, through art, however it is that you can spend time, because we want you to make the time. This is the cultivation part. We have to do this. We have to do the work in order to reap the benefits. And we want you to explore these questions. When you're growing up, how did your parents express emotions? It would be good to think about that. Or they're not your parents, your primary caretaker, or wherever you were for the majority of time. And maybe it's even in the school system, but where you experienced emotions from others. Journal about that. And what messages did you receive from your caretakers? And common example, like the message that I got all the time is like, I would have left my butt behind if it wasn't attached. Mm-hmm. Now that's a common statement that was made in my family. So we want you to think about those things. And they can be jokes, because oftentimes they are jokes that are made about you. Or maybe you got great messages from your parents, like, you're so amazing, and maybe those messages are filtering in how you behave. Maybe you had a lot of big standards to hold up.
Yeah, for sure.
So what were the messages that your parents sent about you to yourself or to their friends? And when you were a child, how did you feel?
Most often,
yeah. How did you feel? Sad, happy, loved, ignored, scared? And obviously we have a whole gamut of emotions, but just try to think about a theme of what you felt like. And so your homework is really tracing back your family of origin story. Take a moment to think about how your family of origin communicated with each other. How did members of the family respond to conflict? With anger, avoidance, curiosity? What did that look like to them? And what did it feel like to you? How have these patterns influenced the way you parent today?